Okay, welcome everyone. August, as I just mentioned, we have a little lower attendance today, presumably because lots of folks are on vacation. So let's just get right into it here. As we know, these meetings are all recorded, so please stay muted unless you're going to be asking a question. The recordings are always available at this address here, watershed.org/DRWI. These meetings occur every third Thursday of the month from 2:30 to 3:30. The Zoom link is always the same, so feel free to store this information, mark it on your calendars, keep that link in your calendar dates if you like. I do send reminder emails, so if there's anyone on the call today or anyone that you know that would like to be on the email distribution list, please let me know and I can add them to that list. Just as a reminder, the groups and folks that are attending these meetings are either directly working in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative or are just working in the Delaware Basin, but not directly associated with the DRWI. And then we have miscellaneous folks who are attending from outside the DRB. We're supporting the work that we talk about in these meetings, as well as these meetings themselves, with DRWI funds as well as Seesaw funds. This is the website for the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, 4 states, 1 source. It's a William Penn Foundation project. Check that out if you like to know more details. As I often point out, this EnviroDIY and the DRB is just a small component of the overall DRWI project. And then Seesaw, which is the Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds. Website on that is a PADEP Growing Greener grant. Just to review quickly, the goals for these meetings, it's simply a time for us all to meet and check in on things, for Stroud Center to provide updates regarding technology and other such things regarding EnviroDIY. We have presentations from different groups as well as on topic presentations. And this is certainly all just to support developing capacity to gather good data and use it purposefully. So facilitators, myself, Rachel Johnson, Krista Reeves, and Shannon Hicks, and Elena Hadley is on board these days, helping Rachel in the field a lot. And we have Master Watershed Stewards Carol Armstrong and George Seeds, who are also available for mentoring new volunteers or anyone that might need help in sort of getting up to speed on managing these sensor stations. And then Stroud DRWI leads are John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott, all at the Stroud Center. So our primary goal, Stroud Center perspective on EnviroDIY and the DRB, our primary goal has continued to be to try to support station owners and managers and the volunteers involved with these stations and using the stations and the data for their own local purposes. Secondarily, we are analyzing the broad data set and developing tools to characterize the data and interpret and communicate the data. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those stats on that today. And here's a slide that I forgot to change. So apologies. Presentation today is not, this is last month's. So the presentation today is what I indicated in that email earlier. It's going to be a review of a number of different things regarding Monitor My Watershed, site visits to stations, as well as some review of the tap water, salt and tap water survey, and so as I mentioned, some overall stats for across the DRB from the continuous data. So just getting into updates, Stroud Center updates, just a reminder that the EnviroDIY monitoring station manual is online and available. You can always check that if you have questions about technology, about data. It's a pretty complete manual at this point. It is in this searchable knowledge database, so you can just type whatever you want in here to search for, and then you have these different sections that you can click into if you want to go about it that way as well. And you can get information there, and you can always feel free to check in with us if something doesn't make sense or if you're not able to find what you need. We're always updating these resources, so we always appreciate feedback. Within the knowledge database, which within the manual, there is this parts list, which has all of the different parts that go into these monitoring stations. So that's just a resource for folks who are building stations, as well as just maybe needing replacement parts. So take advantage of that, get familiar with that if you're sort of in that realm of things of replacing parts or needing kind of supplemental supplies or anything like that. Just a reminder to, if you have a significant problem with your station and you're really not sure how to go about fixing it or dealing with it, feel free to use the EnviroDIY service request form, which again is on this main resources page. It's just a Google form that you'll fill out online, and there's some other additional information that we would like you to give to us so that we can kind of begin the troubleshooting before coming out to the field. So feel free to take advantage of that to communicate and convey information for troubleshooting purposes. And just a reminder on how to access this resources page. You can either type this directly into your browser, /DRWI, or you can just go to the Wiki Watershed page and click on this DRWI tab. So getting into a few more updates, just a reminder on the standard first step in troubleshooting a station if it goes offline. You always want to check battery power and make sure that it's greater than 3.5 volts. If it is, but it's still offline, proceed to the next step. If no, then you're just going to swap a new battery, okay? So if it went below 3.5 and it went offline, then it's likely you just need to swap a battery. But if it went offline above 3.5 volts, turn the station off, swap SD cards, turn the station on. That's it. See if it resolves. And then you can send, if it does not resolve, then you can send the SD card file and any other descriptions to the Stroud Center. And as I think most people know by now, that should be sent to me, Rachel, and Shannon. Okay, just an update here on the Generation 2 Hydros 21 sensor. We've been kind of continuing to make it known that this is available. This is sort of a new form for the sensor. The screws are on the bottom of it now. It used to have a slot on the side, they're now on the bottom. So cleaning those screw heads is a little different. And noting that when you install one of these, you're always going to need to change the channel, the address from 0 to 1. Okay, and one way that can be done is by getting one of these Bluetooth sensor interface gadgets. They're relatively cheap, 79 bucks, and they allow you to automatically change the channel of the CTD sensor. They also allow you, almost more importantly, they allow you to just check station readings when the station is offline. So if a station goes offline, then you can just go out there and check the station right there on site to see if it's still actually taking readings or if the sensor has now stopped taking readings as well. So that's part of this short list of functions. So you can view the CTD sensor data with this gadget. You can change the channels, and there's some other useful information there that you can get from this thing, such as checking the status that will warn of possible freeze damage in your sensor. So here's just a kind of a example readout of what this thing can tell you. So you have the name of the piece of equipment, and then down here it gives you the measurements, and then it tells you your water level, tells you your water temperature, and it tells you your conductivity. So you can imagine that if your station goes offline and you have no way to tell if it's still collecting data other than taking the SD card out, plugging this piece of equipment into the logger and just reading that way can be a lot easier than swapping SD cards and then opening SD card on your computer. Okay, so another really useful function is to use this box to change the channel from 0 to 1. The only other way to do that is by reprogramming the Mayfly data logger. That's not a complicated process if you know what you're doing, but it obviously is kind of the same thing as the previous example, where you have to have your computer there and you have to take the Mayfly out or have a spare Mayfly in order to reprogram the sensor. So this box just makes it a lot easier. Okay, any questions before we move on at this point?
One question. So the listing of, I think, monitoring stations that you gave us, so the manufacturer of monitoring stations that we have in the Godefroy, Cutterbackville area, those machines would be on that list, so we can look for monitoring expectations?
I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're asking, Bert. Can you rephrase?
We've got monitoring stations, as you know about, on the Bashakill,
Right.
before it gets into the Neversink.
Yeah, yeah.
We've been getting data from them, but like the manufacturer's instructions for use, I've never seen them. I just want to make sure that those machines are collecting valid, reliable data. And, you know, how do you check that? Is there like any kind of like quarterly, annual, like checking process?
Yeah, so you know, one of the things we recommend for doing quality control, that is cross-checking the data coming off of these EnviroDIY stations, is to go out with a handheld meter, like a totally separate meter that is calibrated, and going out and just checking, does this handheld meter, you know, match up with the data that are coming off of, yeah, and you're muted, Bert. Does this cross-check match?
Right.
And so
Do
that
on a regular basis.
Yeah, and we recommend, you know, the recommendation is to do that on a quarterly basis, once every 3 months. That's just, you know, that's a recommendation. If everything is going well, just to have that sort of that data to just kind of support and confirm that your station is reading accurately. Now, you can certainly go out and do quality control cross checks if your data look bad, if your data look wacky or funny. Then, you know, a good first step is to just go out with a handheld, you know, calibrated meter, put it in right there beside your sensor, your station sensor, and confirm whether or not they're matching. If they're not matching, then you know that there's an issue there.
Evaluate the unit and just make sure it's functioning properly.
Yeah, and if you get a mismatch, as long as you're sure that your handheld meter is accurately calibrated, if you get a mismatch, then that's the point that you know, either want to talk to your own tech person, you know, you might want to talk to Steven, you know, and see what he thinks, but you can certainly be in touch with the Stroud Center with, you know, Shannon and Rachel and me. To kind of, you know, help start the troubleshooting process with that.
Yeah, because there's a guy in the BKAA, the preserve, who's monitoring, has machines that are being used to monitor water, and he calibrates them like every time. So I'm going to go over the manufacturer's instructions for use to calibrate those machines.
Gotcha.
That's done, I think, like every month. So that's what I wanted to find
Okay.
out.
Yeah, I mean, as far as actual calibration, the EnviroDIY stations, there's no calibration. There's no sort of calibrating those themselves. It's simply cross-checking to make sure that they're functioning correctly.
Got it. Well, thank you very much. I understand.
Sure, absolutely.
Yep.
Anything else? Any questions before we move on? Okay. I'm going to reshare my screen. And Shannon, Scott, Rachel, Krista, please feel free to chime in as I go through these different series of slides here. So first thing we wanted to talk about today was this process that seems like some folks are not aware of this. So we wanted to make sure to kind of update folks on this. You can, if you're a station owner, you can log into your Monitor My Watershed account and set it up so that you can get email alerts that tell you immediately when your station has gone offline. So I'm going to go through each of these steps, but the basic process is to log in to Monitor My Watershed using your username and password. Again, this is just right now, and fortunately, someone can do it, but right now it's only really an option for station owners. You can only have it send to one email address, and that generally is going to be the station owner. But regardless, I'll go into an option for other folks here after I go through this. But you basically just log into Monitor My Watershed. You go to the My Sites tab, which will be in the upper left. You'll click on this on whatever site you're interested in. You'll click the edit button. You'll scroll to the bottom. You'll click the tab that says notify me if site stops receiving sensor data. And then once you click that, an option will pop up to adjust the hours, and it'll say notify after, and then you set this number of hours of site inactivity. We recommend 2 hours. So that means if the station is offline for 2 hours, then it will automatically send you an alert. So it's recommended that all station owners, set this up so that they can receive alerts whenever a station of theirs goes offline. So I'm just going to go through these individual steps. So as I mentioned, the idea here is that station owners can get immediate email alerts from Monitor My Watershed when their stations go offline. Okay, so the first step in this is to go to Monitor My Watershed and then click log in. And then once you're logged in, see I'm logged in there as D. Bressler. Then you'll click on the My Sites tab here. This only comes up once you're logged in. So you'll see in the previous screen, there's no My Sites button. Once you log in, My Sites pops up. Then you'll click on that, and then you'll have this at the bottom, you'll have this list of your registered sites. So then you're going to click on your site, click right there, and you'll go into your site. And then this is the site page. When you get in there, again, you're going to have an edit button. Because you're logged in to one of your personal sites, you'll be able to click an edit button, this edit button. So you'll click that, and then you'll scroll to the bottom, and you'll click this Notify Me tab. Notify me if site stops receiving sensor data. Once you click that, this message here will pop up, or this little notify after blank hours of site inactivity. Then you're going to type 2 in there, and you're going to press save edits. Okay, so type 2. Save edits. You can certainly do a longer length of time if you don't want to be notified in 2 hours. You can set it 4 or 6 or whatever. We recommend 2. Sometimes there will be a default of 0. That will start getting you crazy number of emails. So you want to go in there and adjust it if you start having that problem, and set that to a new number.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
To that point, if anyone has a station that doesn't have very solid cellular connectivity, like if your station is going in and out every couple hours consistently, you might want to bump up that 2 hours of inactivity to maybe 6 or somewhere around there, just to avoid, getting a ton of emails if you know your station is going to be offline.
That's a great point, Rachel, and I would have even made a slide about that, because that's a really good point. Some stations just, for whatever reason, lack of consistent connectivity with the cell towers and such, will have inactivity that can be longer than that. So if you know that you're just sort of naturally in one of those situations, then as Rachel points out, you might want to bump that up to a number of hours that's going to be reasonable and is going to alert you to a level of inactivity that is worrisome for your particular situation. Thanks, Rachel. Great point. Okay. So then once you do that and you save edits, you'll get this confirmation. The site has been updated successfully. Okay. And then this is the email alert. This is an example email that you would get. So this is a station that was stolen. So it's got a ridiculous number of hours that it's been offline, but regardless, the idea is that you will receive this type of email alert if your station passes that number that you just set. Okay, so this is too much text. So I guess I'll just read it so it's clear. An option for people that are not station owners. So if you're not a station owner, you can still follow sites. What this does is allows you to have whatever sites you want under your My Sites tab. It just gives you easier access to the sites. Unfortunately, it does not currently allow you to receive alerts when a station goes offline. So, the main thing it does is it just gives you all of the sites that you are focusing on. It puts them in your My Sites dashboard, okay? No alerts are going to come into you, but it at least gets them, in a spot where you can just easily click on them. You don't have to go to browse sites and navigate to them on the map or anything like that. You can just go into your My Sites tab and find them there. So it does make accessing the sites easier. Certainly, if you're as a station owner, or if if you're not a station owner and you'd like to be made aware of alerts, talk to your station owner and just make sure that they set their account up so that they're getting those alerts. And then when they get those alerts, they can pass those on to whoever else is working on and supporting the stations. Okay. So in order to follow a site, you still need a Monitor My Watershed account. So if you don't have one as a person that is supporting one of these stations, then set yourself up with a monitoring account. Just go to sign up. But once you have an account set up, a username and pass, you'll just log in. And then you'll go to Browse Sites. And then you'll go to the site that you want to follow. You click on the site page. And then all you'll do is click follow in the upper right corner of that site's page. And then the site will show up under your My Sites tab. So that when you log into when you go and log into Monitor, you'll have this My Sites tab. You click on that, and then you'll have only the sites that you are personally interested in under this My Sites dashboard. And it'll show you your sites in this map as well, in the My Sites tab. Okay. So any questions on that before we move on to the next section?
I have a question.
Sure, Jenna.
If someone wants to create a login account just to follow another site, will they still be able to look at the data and download the data from that station?
Yep.
Okay.
Anyone can download data. You don't even have to be logged in order to download data. So yeah, that's a nice feature of the Monitor My Watershed. It certainly has its quirks as it gets developed, but one of the really nice features is that it's totally public and anyone can download data. Okay, so let's go. Any other questions before we go into the next section? Okay. So salt in tap water survey. So this is a Stroud Center pilot project. We talked about this back in the spring. We're sort of just exploring what tap water looks like and thinking about, that this maybe at some point could be turned into a broader study and community science application. So the survey instructions are at this same Wiki Watershed DRWI page. This is the shortcut, #salt-monitoring. If you just go to the main page, you can certainly just scroll down or click on one of the main tabs at the top. And then there's a salt monitoring resources tab section. And then here's the instructions within that. It's just a PDF that you can click on. And this is that PDF. It's a little hard to read on the screen here, but it essentially just walks you through the basic process of using one of these chloride strips to measure the chloride level in your tap water. So really all it is taking one of these strips, putting it in some of your tap water and waiting for this strip to complete. This black line at the top, or this line at the top turns black, and when it's fully black is when you know you're ready for it to be read. And then there are some recommendations here in terms of low salt diet and secondary drinking water criteria and such. So the reason I'm bringing that up is this is an open survey. I'm going to share some results, but we are certainly encouraging anyone who wants to participate in this survey to go ahead and do that. If you'd like, we can provide you with chloride strips. Just be in touch and we can send you a few. There is a electronic data entry once you've completed the measurement. You can go into this link to this Google form, which is again in the instructions. And then you have access to all the data that have been collected in this spreadsheet. So you can analyze the data and look at the data yourself if you want. This is the data that have been collected so far. So we can see as far south as Wilmington and as far north as, north of Mount Pocono. Okay. The way these measurements are categorized in this map are the red ones have exceeded the low no salt dietary guideline from the EPA. And the green ones are below that level. That level is in terms of sodium. So what we did is converted, assuming that the sodium is from NaCl, we've converted it to chloride. And so it's 31 milligrams of chloride. So these red sites have more than 31 milligrams of chloride, more milligrams per liter chloride, and the green ones have less. So this is obviously very low and is only really applicable to people who are on doctor recommended low salt, no salt diets. But nonetheless, you can see that there are quite a few taps in the region that exceed that level. And it's not surprising considering the level of salt contamination that we find in the groundwater, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. as a reference, natural natural chloride levels in streams in this region are generally lower than 20 and often much lower than that. So even though 31 is low, it still is well above natural levels. So here are those results in a bar graph. So one thing to note here is those strips only go to 32 milligrams per liter. So anything that was less, any strips that measured less than 32, we put at 16 milligrams per liter. So that's all these. So these really could be lower than 16, or they could be all the way up to this range. We put them at 16 just as a sort of a median point regarding this 32. So here's the 31 milligram per liter chloride level, low salt, no salt. And you can see about half the sites exceeded that. Another thing to point out here is that they're categorized either as a private well or a public water system. And you can see that there's kind of a pretty even distribution. If you broke it out half and half, you definitely have a greater proportion of public water supply up here and the exceeding area. But you can see that the top two, which are at 90 and maybe 95 milligrams per liter chloride, are from private wells. So it's likely that those are in areas where maybe the groundwater is starting to be influenced by salt contamination, or is well into salt contamination, really. Okay. So just as a wrap up of the salt in tap water info, again, you can access this at the main resources page, wikiwatershed.org/DRWI. The hashtag salt-monitoring will just get you right to that spot. But if you go to this DRWI page, you can just scroll down and get to it that way. In talking to folks, some folks have inquired, do we want multiple measurements at single locations? Yes. I think that is going to be useful information just to see about how, these water levels change. A recent paper out of Philadelphia showed that tap water chloride levels did indeed change over time. And in this case, in Philadelphia region and surrounding areas, was in relation to winter road salt events, in which drinking water is being taken out of local rivers, and at times when road salt is flushing into the streams, the drinking water showed increases in salt, and that was correlated with road salt flushes into local rivers. So yes, definitely do multiple measurements if you'd like. And as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like chloride strips, feel free to be in touch with me or Rachel, and we can get you strips. Okay. Any questions on that before we move on to the next section? Okay. So next section, site visit statistics. So I've got a couple different graphs here that are going to show really some stats on how often people are visiting stations, how frequently sensors are being cleaned, how frequently quality control is being done, how frequently those cross checks that we talked about earlier are being done. So this first graph is a graph of frequency of visits to EnviroDIY stations in the DRB. So this visit frequency is specifically recorded here as average number of days between visits. to these individual sites. So these are all individual sites. Each bar is an individual site. The dotted line here is at 30 days, so once a month. So, you know, in our recommendations sheet, we mention about recommending a weekly visit as a start until you really start to understand your station dynamics. So the 30 days is really just kind of a reference point. Some sites need to be visited much more frequently than that. Some sites maybe don't need to be visited that frequently. It really depends on the site. But we certainly encourage people to try to understand your sites and do these cross checks of your data before and after cleaning to you know, see about how much cleaning is changing your measurements and you know, looking into how quickly you know, vines and vegetation are growing up around your logger and around the solar panel and so on, to start to determine really what is necessary in terms of visits for your particular stations. And that can vary seasonally. As we know, algae growth can be super quick in the summers. And so maybe you need to visit a site or two of yours in the summer more often than you do in the winter. All things to consider. So the 30 days is just a reference, but you can see about half the sites are getting visited, you know, more frequently than every 30 days. And you can see quite a few down here are getting visited, you know, probably once a week or so, once every 2 weeks, and then getting up into once a month, and then, you know, once every 2-3 months. And then there's a few in here that are not getting visited much at all. Now, one important thing to point out is that this is just data that comes from the EnviroDIY field visit online data form. So if you don't enter your data into the online form, then we have Stroud Center has no way to track that the stations are being visited. So we certainly encourage you to fill out those forms so that the site visits can be documented and tracked. And that certainly is going to allow Stroud Center to provide better and more consistent support to groups that need it. So same thing. Geez, it's already 3:10, so I better get moving here. Same thing here. This is average cleaning visits per month. Okay, so this is average once a month, average once every 2 months, average once every 3 months. So, you know, you can see here, you know, there's quite a few sites that aren't being cleaned even once a month. All these sites are being cleaned less than once a month. Now, as I pointed out, that's not, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's a, you know, maybe a little bit of a red flag, maybe an orange or yellow flag, just to kind of, you know, tune in to our stations being visited enough. You know, are our sensors clean? Have we taken our sensors off the, you know, out of the water recently and really done a thorough inspection of the, you know, situation, cleaning the sensors thoroughly? Then, as we see, there's quite a few sites here that are being visited much more than once a month. Okay, and again, the only way we have to track this is by the online form. So there may, you know, if your site happened to be down in this range of less than once a month per cleaning, then but you're definitely going out to clean more than once a month or you know, in that range, but aren't filling out forms, there's no way that's going to go on record for that type of maintenance and upkeep. It's not required, but we certainly recommend it and request it so that we can just kind of keep better track of things and know and understand how, you know, how frequently groups need to go to these stations. Okay, and then here we have QC. So this is doing those cross checks that I mentioned before. So this is average site visits per year. Okay, so we recommend quarterly. And so here's the 4 sites per visit, 4 visits per year line. And so you can see that people are doing pretty good with QC. There's quite a few sites that are getting more QC, you know, a good bit of QC throughout the year. So that's great. Certainly there's quite a few that are under that limit. We do recommend 4 visits per year, once every 3 months. But, you know, it's not the end of the world if you don't get out 4 times in a year, especially if you're pretty sure that your station is functioning correctly and the QC visits that you do look good and your cross checks match up nicely. Again, just pointing out that these, you know, the only way we have to track this is by the online form. So just revisiting that idea, after every site visit, please complete an EnviroDIY field visit data form and enter the info into the online form. Again, it's at this resources page. So you go to this page, it's at the very top of the page. Just click on that button there, that tab there, and it takes you immediately into the Google form in which you will enter all the data that you have recorded on the data sheet. You can download blank data sheets here. You can enter the data directly into the Google form if you have good cell coverage and want to enter the data into the Google form on your phone or tablet out in the field. You can certainly do that. Often people like to fill out a hard copy data sheet and then enter it online later. But we certainly encourage folks to do that for every site visit. Okay, so finally, I'm going to get into the continuous data statistics from across the DRB. So some of these graphs I'm going to show, well, all these graphs I'm going to show are categorized with green as fully supporting in terms of ecological use assessment, and red not supporting. And then there's these gray categories for insufficient information or not assessed. Okay, so it's pretty much just fully supporting and not supporting green and red. They're not, those colors, you know, we're not really going to be talking much about that today. I just wanted to make sure that that was understood as to why those colors are there. We're really just going to be looking at the actual just kind of range of the bars that we see. So let's get right into that. Also, let's not pay attention to the blue dots here. We mostly just want to pay attention to the height of these bars. Just for reference, though, the blue dots are the number of observations. So just the number of continuous data points used. So this is summer base flow conductivity. So we can see here, this is for about 100 sites. So not the full number of sites that are out in the basin now. There's data for about 140 sites now. So this is a little bit older, but nonetheless, you know, the general ranges of conductivity in the DRB are in the, you know, 50 to 150 range, some up to 200 or a little above 200, but the natural ranges are down here in this range. So you can see the vast majority of sites are exceeding natural levels of conductivity during base flow conditions. This site or this graph here, we have winter storm conductivity, and this specifically is the average across all winter conductivity spikes. So the more spikes there are, the more points that will go into these averages. So you can see that these average spikes, you know, are quite high for certain sites. There's some statistics here that kind of, I think, maybe bias this a little bit, because if a site has a whole lot of small spikes, it's going to be represented here. So, you know, we may want to kind of we may want to represent this in a little bit different way and show like maximum top 3 spikes or something like that to really talk about the full extent of conductivity spikes. But regardless, you can see that there's, you know, quite a bit of winter activity going on here. As we all know, anyone who views these stations in an urban area or residential area knows that there are road salt spikes in the wintertime. So I mentioned earlier that conductivity in this in the DRB is generally in the 50 to 150 range, sometimes in these limestone streams a little bit above 200, the natural range. What this graph is a deviation of conductivity from predicted. So, and that prediction is the predicted natural conductivities from this Olson-Cormier 2019 paper, in which they modeled conductivity levels across the country and predicted what those levels should be without human influence. So you can see here that almost all the sites exceed natural levels, and you know, they're often exceeding by 200 units or more, these natural levels. So it shows really vast and broad you know, contamination across the basin. The urban stream syndrome, a main factor that or a main variable that is used to represent the urban stream syndrome is conductivity. As urbanization goes up, conductivity goes up. So this really shows that in terms of how far actual conductivity values are away or deviating from natural levels. So here we've converted conductivity to chloride. So as I think most people know, conductivity is highly correlated, highly related to chloride. Chloride is a big influence on conductivity levels. So we've converted conductivity to chloride, mean chloride, average chloride. And we have it, what we have superimposed here are different thresholds. So at 50 milligrams per liter, we have the Ohio and Maryland recent recommendations on hazard thresholds. So these are thresholds that these states and other scientific papers have noted that even at 40 or 50 milligrams per liter, there are chloride effects on aquatic organisms that influence the trophic relationships in these streams. This at 120 milligrams per liter chloride is the Canadian chronic chloride limit. And you can see about half the sites exceed that. That is the limit that the country of Canada uses for chloride contamination and significant impacts on aquatic communities. You can see half the sites exceed that. This was established in, I think it was 2011. So relatively recent research went into this level. The EPA chronic chloride threshold, which is based on a limited number of studies, was set in 1988 and is still at 230. That is only a recommendation. That a recommendation for states. A lot of states have their threshold set at 230. And you can see even at that level, there are, you know, a fifth of the sites are exceeding that in the DRB. So this next graph is speaking to acute levels. So this is a maximum 48-hour chloride. And you can see here this red line, it's a little bit hard to see, but this red line represents the EPA acute limit of 860. And you can see that this is all winter, this is really wintertime data when spikes are happening. But you can see that about 30% of the sites, or maybe even more than that really, are exceeding this acute limit during the winter time. So there are definite effects, according to these thresholds, there are definite effects happening on these aquatic communities. So you're at 323, and that is my last slide on the updates and the data and such. So I will stop share and see if we have any questions on any of that.
I have a quick question.
Sure, David.
Yeah, so you mentioned ecological use assessment. What does it mean to support that or to not support that?
Oh boy, Scott's fresher on that than me. Scott, do you want to?
Each of the states provides their own definition of how to assess whether a particular water body is supporting or not supporting ecological use. So it varies between states how they perform those assessments.
Okay,
And so that was just a kind of a course yes, no, as to the sites that have stations on them in the Delaware Basin, whether they are supporting or not supporting according to their individual state criteria.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good question. Rob, how did I know? I was just looking at you thinking, I wonder if Rob has a question. Oh, you're muted, Rob.
Thank you. So when you converted conductivity to chloride, did you use a certain conversion factor, or because we were tracking that per site?
Yes,
And
yes, and
developing a curve.
that's a great point, Rob. So we used a conversion factor of about a 3.5 to 1 ratio. That is based on the broad data set. That is based on like all conductivity, all chloride values across the DRB. So it's a coarse way to do that conversion. Ideally, every site, as you point out, every site has an individual conductivity to chloride curve to fine tune that relationship, because it really does vary site to site. So, you know, ideally there is a relationship for every different stream, certainly, you know, or every different, you know, small watershed. The small, you know, the finer you get, the better. I think the closer you're going to get to that exact relationship in a particular stream for a particular station. But those, you know, those ratios are generally in that kind of range. You know, in that 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1 ratio. As
So
far as as far as I've seen.
David,
not having a curve for each site, that would be a good estimator, the 3.5 to 1.
Yeah, I mean, it's coarse. You have to keep in mind, but you know, the chloride measurements themselves are usually coarse. The conductivity measurements are relatively coarse. You know, so this is really just giving you an idea of levels, because they're going to even, you know, levels are going to vary in a stream depending on how dilute the stream is at a particular time. During drought conditions, the chloride concentration is going to be, you know, higher than times whenever there's a little more water, a little more precipitation happening. Scott, what were you going to say?
the slope is 0.35 for those conversions, just to clarify.
Okay. Yeah. So
0.35. Okay, thank you.
I sort of, Sarah, and that was, so sorry, I probably should be a little more explicit. That Scott used that. Sarah, I was working with Sarah over the last couple of days to develop the actual curve, and that curve itself is in about a 3.5 to 1 ratio. So Scott sort of used even more of a general sort of, you know, just based on even coarser data before we had compiled all of it for that relationship. And then we're fine tuning it with more, you know, we're getting more grab sample results in. And so we were trying to fine tune it to the point to get those plots even refined more for today. But that plot that with the newest data does seem to indicate that it's about a 3.5 to 1 ratio.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Hey, Dave, this is Steve. I have a question.
Sure.
Has Stroud considered other things that may impact conductivity besides the chloride? For example, nutrients in the stream, like phosphates or nitrates?
Yeah, I saw
What
your
kind of impact is that?
I saw your email today, Steve, about that. You know, I haven't seen, and Scott, you can speak to this, or Krista, or Carol maybe, but I haven't seen any, you know, studies that specifically, you know, go in and run, you know, put in nitrate, for instance, different amounts of nitrate, and see specifically how that affects conductivity. I have sort of the same impression that you do, Steve, that the nutrients don't affect it nearly as much as, for instance, you know, these road salt contributions, especially phosphate, nitrate, because it's in higher concentrations in the stream, you know, much higher than phosphate in terms of milligrams per liter generally, that nitrate is going to affect it more than phosphate. But I think I have the same impression as you, Steve, that the nutrients are not affecting it nearly as much as what road salt does. That said, certainly agricultural areas can have higher conductivities because of nutrient pollution. But it's just, you're just not going to see these enormous things like you see in urban areas because of salt. To my understanding, I don't know if Scott or Krista, if you want to speak to that.
I was just writing in the chat that nitrate, nitrite, orthophosphate, the concentrations of those are all very low relative to sodium chloride, magnesium, manganese, the other ions that are affecting conductivity. So they play a much lower role overall.
The only thing I'm unsure of, this is Carol, is that I know that tires and other automechanical fluids and particles that are on roads are a major source, are actually a very significant and large source of pollution in waterways and marine environments, and yet, and of course are toxic to fish. But we, you know, I don't know that I haven't seen anything, which doesn't mean anything, trying to quantify how much is running off into our freshwater streams and what effect that might have on conductivity. But that is a significant contaminant.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, I think conductivity maybe can be used as a general indicator of those types of pollutants, but it is not being affected. You know, it has to be charged particles in order for it to register on the conductivity scale. So, you know, these oil sourced things are not going to show up, as I understand it, on the conductivity scale. So
Okay.
I think that's a fair point, Carol.
Well, it's good to know. I didn't know that they would not impact it.
Yeah, so should, you know, like anything like organic, or, you know, these petrochemical things, and or sugar.
But I mean,
or
there are additives in it.
whatever.
Aren't there there are a lot of chemical additives to all these products, though. It's not just the oil base.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, there is definitely an urban response that can be measured by conductivity that is not that is not directly related to road salt. You know, it certainly is still, the urban response, as I understand, is still going to be related to salt in general, but might be from salt that's in wastewater, as well as, you know, anything else that is going to register on that conductivity scale. And so I think conductivity and salt is, you know, salt is toxic itself, or can be toxic itself, but it can also simply serve as an indicator of lots of other pollutants that are going to be associated with salt. You know, when road salt runs off into the storm drain and into the stream, it's not just carrying salt, there's going to be all kinds of other stuff in there too, you know, tire dust, for instance, or oil or gas or whatever. And so those would be expected to all be correlated.
And antifreeze, yeah.
Antifreeze. Who knows what else? Scott, Krista, anything else there?
No, nothing off the top of my head.
Okay. All right, we are already past 3:30. Let me just share one more time here and just go through these last couple slides. So just as a reminder, mentors are available if you would like to buff up on your station management or anything else. Feel free to be in touch. These folks are available. Krista's up north. Rachel's down here at the Stroud Center, and Carol and George are in Chester County. Next month's meeting, Thursday, September 15th. Hopefully everyone can join. I'm just wrapping up. And that's everything. Any other questions at this point?
Yeah, I actually had one more question, Dave. It's Krista. So recently we did QC and pulled one of our sensors. We thought the CTD was going to need to be replaced, but found a tiny rock wedged in there that was, you know, offsetting our depth. We want to go ahead and mathematically correct for that, you know, wrong data that's been collected. Is there a way to upload that and overwrite the data that's already on Monitor My Watershed?
Unfortunately, no. That is one of the features that I think ideally would be in there, but this is a process, and currently there is no way. There is a way to fill in data gaps,
Right.
but you cannot overwrite the data. Scott, do you have anything else to say about that?
I don't have anything to add. I would be reluctant to suggest it, but it may be possible to an entire station, then remake a station and add back all data. I don't want to suggest you do that, Krista, without
Right.
all talking through that and getting some feedback from Sarah and others behind the scenes to see what other unknown ramifications that could have.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bummer
Ugly way to
because
do it.
I know you guys do basin-wide analyses, and I want that data to be as correct as possible so that, you know, you have the best possible information you're working with when doing that. But I also don't want to go and delete everything from my station on Monitor and then have it not work. So
Yeah, and that is one of the sort of growing pains of this whole process. You know, Monitor is being improved upon in chunks, and it definitely is getting better. But that is a feature that lots of people have pointed out at this point. People like you, Krista, who are tuned into the data, and would be ideal, but it is when you get into that type of function, it's pretty complicated when it comes to the actual engineering of it, as I understand it. So hopefully we'll get to that point at some point.
that's for the next grant cycle, right?
Yeah, hopefully. Anyone else? Anything else? Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate you attending. Feel free to be in touch, you know, as you need help, and take care and be safe out there.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye all.